Welcome. So today we're going to dig into a really powerful idea. It's about 2,500 years old, it comes from Buddhist philosophy, and it could totally change how you see yourself, your identity, and yeah, even your most difficult feelings. Okay, let's just jump right in. We're going to start with what seems like a super simple question, but trust me, it's one that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. Who are you, really? When you say I or me, what are you actually pointing at?
All right, to get to the bottom of this, we've got to look at how we even think about our own identity. I mean, is there some core, unchanging you that's been there your entire life, from when you were a little kid all the way to now? This is such a great way to think about it. It's a classic thought experiment, right? The ship of Theseus. Imagine a ship. Over the years, every single plank gets replaced one by one. The question is it still the same ship at the end? And you can ask the same thing about yourself. Your body's cells are constantly changing. Your thoughts, your feelings, your opinions, they're completely different from when you were a kid. So how can you be the same person? This is exactly what Buddhism decided to tackle head on.
Okay, so with that puzzle in mind, let's get into the really core teaching from Buddhism that offers a pretty radical answer to this question. It challenges one of the most basic things we assume about who we are. So right at the heart of all of this is a concept called anatta. It's a Pali word, and it basically means non-self. And what it's saying is that when we really honestly look for some kind of permanent, stable, independent self, we just can't find it. What we call me isn't a solid thing at all. It's more like a dynamic, always changing process. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you can see how anatta stands in direct contrast to the mainstream Hindu idea of Atman. In Hinduism, there's this idea of an eternal, unchanging soul at our core. But Buddhism comes along and says, wait a minute, real freedom or liberation doesn't come from finding this true self. It comes from seeing that this whole idea of a fixed self is an illusion in the first place.
And this is such a crucial point. A lot of people hear non-self and think Buddhism is saying you don't exist, but that's not it at all. As the scholar Richard Gombrich points out here, anatta doesn't mean you don't have a self. It means that whatever you are not that permanent, fixed thing, that Atman. It's a really subtle but profound difference. It's like you're not a noun, you're a verb, you're a process. Okay, so if there's no solid me, then what on earth are we? Well, Buddhism breaks it down into these 5 components, or aggregates as they're called. Think of them as 5 heaps of constantly changing stuff. You've got your body, right? Form, then your feelings, your perceptions, like what you see and hear, your mental habits, all those impulses and thoughts. And finally, just plain old consciousness, that moment-to-moment awareness. The key here is that none of these on their own are you. They're all just flowing and interacting with each other, creating the experience of a solid I from one moment to the next. Now, I know this can all sound a little bit heady, a little abstract, but it has some seriously practical, down-to-earth implications. I mean, if there's no solid wall between me and you, how does that change the way we relate to everyone? Well, there's a core Buddhist practice that it gives us a really powerful way to explore that. And that practice is called Metta Bhavana. You can translate it as loving kindness cultivation. And that word cultivation is key. It's not about just waiting around to feel kind. It's about actively generating it, like training a muscle. You're literally training your heart and mind to be more open and friendly. And this is such a brilliant breakdown of how it works. You start with yourself. And, for a lot of us, that's actually the hardest part. Then you slowly, gradually expand that circle of kindness outward. You bring a good friend to mind, then someone you feel neutral about, maybe the person at the grocery store. And then, and this is the real challenge, you extend it to a difficult person. The whole point is to systematically break down those artificial walls we put up between me and them to help us feel our shared humanity on a gut level. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and see how this whole idea of non-self can totally transform our relationship with our own minds, especially with our most painful, difficult emotions. So Buddhism talks about these 3 root destructive emotions, or poisons, also called the kleshas. We all know them, right? There's craving, that obsessive need for something. There's aggression or aversion, that pushing away, that hatred. And then there's ignorance, which is kind of like being numb or out of touch. But here's the thing. The teachings say the problem isn't the raw energy of the emotion itself. The problem is how we react, how we immediately grab it and say, this is my anger or my craving. So think about how an emotion like anger actually works. It almost never just appears out of nowhere. It starts small. It starts as an ember. Maybe it's just a faint tightness in your shoulders or a little clench in your stomach. It's this tiny physical signal that
honestly, we usually just ignore completely. But if we miss it at that ember stage, it starts to grow. It becomes a contained fire. And how does that happen? Our mind jumps in. It grabs that physical feeling and starts weaving a story around it. He shouldn't have said that to me. This always happens. It's so unfair. This is where the emotion gets its fuel, where it really starts to pick up speed. And if we just keep feeding that fire with our story, well, you know what happens? It can blow up into a full-on inferno. The emotion just feels too big, too overwhelming to handle, and we act out. We say things we regret, we do things that cause damage, both to other people and to ourselves. And this is such a key insight. The real deep suffering, it doesn't come from that initial spark, that ember. It comes from what a Buddhist teacher named Sharon Salzberg calls the add-ons. It's the story we tell, it's the way we act out, or maybe the way we try to stuff the feeling down and pretend it's not there. Those are the things that pour gasoline on the fire. Okay, so what do we do? How do we put out the fire before it gets out of control? The teacher Pema Children offers this really simple but incredibly powerful 3-step method. First, you just drop the storyline. Forget about who's right and who's wrong and just feel the raw physical sensations in your body. Second, you stay with it. You just stay present with that energy. You don't act on it, but you don't push it away either. You're just willing to feel the discomfort. And third, and this is so important, you're kind to yourself through the whole process. No judging, no shaming, just a gentle, patient awareness. And when we can learn to do that, to just stay with the raw, pure energy of an emotion before we spin it into a big story, we can discover something pretty amazing. We find that underneath all that chaos, there's actually a powerful, wakeful quality. That raw energy of anger, for instance, can actually be the energy of clarity. The energy of craving can transform into a kind of sharp, discerning wisdom. And that really leaves us with this final, provocative thought that kind of brings everything full circle. We started by asking, who are you? And we spend so much of our lives trying to protect this fixed idea of me and trying to get rid of all my unpleasant feelings. But what if that's just the completely wrong way to go about it? What if letting go of this idea of a solid self and learning to meet our emotions with kindness and awareness, what if that isn't about solving a problem at all, but about discovering the very path to our own freedom?